Hello and welcome to episode 63 of the Virtual Velo Podcast with me, Emma Martin, and my co-host, Chris Schwanker. Well, today on the podcast, we are thrilled to have Frank Garcia with us. Frank, no stranger to cycling and the tech worlds. He's a true pioneer in both. As the founder and CEO of Improvement Interactive, Frank has built custom business software for major players, but his influence doesn't stop there. He was one of the first to explore racing on Zwift, and in 2015, Frank became a legend in the virtual cycling community by completing what is thought to be one of the first ever virtual Everestings on Zwift, 165 miles in 17 hours. Well, he went on to create CVR, where he took virtual racing to a new level, attracting top Zwift talent and offering $100,000 in cash and prizes during the 2018 CVR World Cup League season. Fast forward to 2024 and Frank, well, he is at it once again, breaking new ground with his latest venture, Smash Your Fitness. It's a virtual cycling app designed to make interactive fitness more accessible by eliminating the need for expensive hardware, pairing seamlessly with his Smashometer wearable. And he's on the Virtual Velo Network's most impactful list, Chris.
There are very few people in the cycling esports, virtual cycling space that have such a depth of understanding and history and knowledge of the evolution of the space. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to speak to this true visionary in cycling esports.
Well, Frank, thank you very much for joining us today on the Virtual Velo Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's go back. And when I say go back, I'm talking like a decade back. I was researching a piece on the origins of Zwift racing, and I found what I think is the first documented starting list of a Zwift race. It went back to April 14th of 2014. And on the list of finishers for this race was Frank Garcia, next to pioneers like Christian Weidman. It must have felt like you were like an explorer, like some kind of uncharted world of competitive cycling that nobody had ever experienced before. What was it like back then?
I don't know that we had the explorer sense back then. I think we were just having a lot of fun riding around, sort of the virtual worlds of Zwift. I was a bike racer, so obviously racing was something that was in my DNA and others' DNAs. Kevin Connors started a team, and then Team X came along. We started another team, Team X, and then we were like, well, we've got teams, we've got virtual places. People were kind of racing in not, any sort of formal way, but you'd get on and, I'd see like, Shane Miller as an example on the first island of Zwift. We sort of race around, we'd race each other. Shane would pretty much destroy everybody in those early days in terms of what was happening. And then with regards to Zwift, we were just like, we should do some racing. And so CW set up the first event. Christian, we all got together and said, go. That was how formal it was. And we raced. So we I think that's kind of where it started.
Well, Frank, it's incredible to think about how far the sport's come since then and where it is. But you haven't stopped, and your journey led you to create CVR, which many of our listeners will recognise. But for our listeners who may not be familiar with CVR, how would you describe CVR itself?
The CVR World Cup was really sort of, from my perspective, right, the sport continues to move on, but from my perspective, that was sort of the culmination of sort of CW starting racing events on Zwift before there was, pins to start. You literally just sort of all stopped as a group and then started, to having events in London and Vancouver and LA and Paris. And we had a lot of fun with that, bringing people into venues. Typically, our venues were velodromes. Of course, the standard cyclist would be like, oh, how can you be in a velodrome and not actually do the velodrome? So, we had a lot of fun with that. That was sort of the culmination for us. It was a great community event. We had a lot of events leading up to CVR World Cup, sort of worldwide, all virtually. And then we'd come together for sort of the final show.
Was this really an evolutionary move, Frank, or did you really see the vision of what potential virtual cycling could become?
I think really it came from two things. One, we were having a lot of fun. and there was a lot of excitement and sort of passion. Rick Woods helped us get started as well. And we just were a group of individuals who were sort of pursuing things that we enjoyed. And that just, sort of building over time. Now, to be fair, my son at the time was a gamer. In fact, he has a fairly significant YouTube channel called Frankly Gaming now. But back then he was in high school and he was really into esports. And so that kind of got me into esports. And between the passion for what we were doing with racing inside of Zwift and his interest sparked my interest, I was like, hey, this could really be something that we could do, and we could sort of be on the leading edge of that particular curve. And so we decided to pursue virtual cycling esports with some real verve, with some real passion, and that's what we did.
Yeah, I think that you're understating it a little bit, Frank, really. CVR was huge then, and it still comes up now as one of the groundbreaking events of cycling esports. You talk about the events that were all over the world. You had tournaments in Vegas, Paris, London. You had broadcasters like the legendary Hunter Allen and Nathan Guerra calling the action. One of the goats of the sport, Lionel Vujasin, basically was thrust on the scene in that Vancouver final that you hosted. Let's not forget about the money that was up for grabs, right? In 2018 season alone, you offered up over $100,000. Put that into perspective, that's more than the Zwift World Series. That's more than Sunday Race Cup races now. So when I say Sunday Race Cup for individual races, the total prize pool is certainly a lot more than that. But you understand what I'm saying. That was 7-8 years ago now. Did you realize then, or can you realize now, reflecting back, the significant impact that had on the origins of the emerging discipline of cycling esports and potentially the creation of a sport?
Well, I wish it had more of an impact, is how I would look at that. So I think we did a really good job of putting on events, not only the in-person live events, but the events that preceded them. I think we were on sort of the leading curve. It was a little bit more the Wild West back then. And so we brought rules into the space. Actually, we got quite a bit of pushback. And now today, I would say, too many rules. But we were certainly at a spot in time where we sort of did pioneer a number of those space, and we came up with a way to sort of approach both the virtual and the physical events in a way that seemed to resonate with people. So I think that was a great starting point. I think in the end, we would have liked to have done a lot more in that space, but there were some challenges in going about that. And so we had to go a slightly different direction.
Frank, can I ask, what would you have liked to have done? You started that by saying you didn't really have the impact you would have liked to have had. What impact, if you could take time back, what impact would you have loved to have seen CVR and that series have?
I think that CVR had the potential to be something very significant. And I think if we'd continued along that particular path over the last, I guess that would be another 6-7 years now, I think CVR would be quite a bit larger and a significant for the virtual cycling / esports landscape. But at the time, Zwift really sort of wanted to own that particular space. And, indeed, they sort of started, a company, got a CEO in to, sort of pursue esports. And so they wanted to go in some different directions. I would say maybe a little bit more company oriented, and we wanted to be a little bit more community oriented. We also wanted to add a little more flair to the game itself, which we think would have helped with esports viewership. Unbeknownst to a lot of people, I think, in the community, is we worked with Microsoft when the Mixer, and we were getting thousands, tens of thousands of concurrent views on Mixer, and we were getting a lot of feedback about indoor cycling esports and Zwift as a platform, and we were trying to provide that feedback successfully to Zwift to sort of move the esports movement in a direction that we thought was appropriate. And I think Zwift had a little bit different opinions about how that should proceed. And that sort of stifled that passion for CVR World Cup on our side.
Yeah, it certainly came to a screeching halt. Do you think that if you had been able to realize your vision, that the sport would be much further along than it is now? And when I say that, I mean, we saw the first live event, World Championship, this year, and it was such a tremendously successful event. You were doing this 7 years ago. Do you think that the sport would be more professional? Do you think that it would be recognized as an Olympic sport now if you were allowed to continue? And when I say allowed to continue, you basically were not allowed.
I think, to be fair, the way that I would say it is, We had conversations with Zwift, and they made it clear that maybe we were, from their perspective, not from our perspective, maybe a little bit ahead of ourselves. And I think they wanted to perhaps control the narrative a bit more. They sort of made that clear. Now, interestingly, after Vancouver, Zwift sort of came back and was like, well, maybe this is a good thing for us as well. But by then the die had been cast, right? We had shifted our focus at that particular point in time. It was a little bit late in terms of what happened. I think even today that are played are not oriented enough towards gameplay. And this causes the esports portion of that. I think there's sort of a macro effect and sort of a micro effect. I would say the micro effect is sort of the games inside the cycling space need to have a little bit more gameplay in them. And I think the macro sense, what a lot of people don't really understand, is that esports in general, the successful ones they don't mimic physical sports, as an example, right? So most of the big esports are going to be like, Dota or CSGO or those types of games. And obviously there's a lot of gameplay in these types of games. And then you have sort of the physical sports. So let's take FIFA as an example, soccer. Obviously a huge sport. Obviously they have esports events all the time. But if you were to talk to a company like Blast, who puts on all these big, huge events, they might tell you, or they probably would, that their focus isn't esports that mimic physical sports, but these Rocket League and things that are a little bit more gamified. Because what they find is if the sport is was more like a true simulation of an actual sport, then people tend to want to watch the actual sport versus the virtual version of it. And so they would tend to put their focus in those directions. So I think that's the macro problem for indoor cycling esports. We saw that early on. And to be honest, I've done a lot of racing, both outdoors and indoors. And even I would become fatigued from racing all the time indoors, right? I mean, you got to get some really hardcore people that can do it, year after year after year as a discipline, if they're not doing something, outdoors. So you mentioned, Vancouver. It was a very interesting event. And actually, not only did the women get paid as much, they actually got paid more. And the reason they got paid more was we had interactions with the audience. And based on those interactions with the audience, we paid some bonuses out. The women had better interaction with the audience. And so they actually got paid not very much, right? It was basically the same, but a little bit more. And they had a really good time with that, at that particular event. But I think we need to add, I'll give you an example. Let's take some cross-pollination across different sorts of sports. So if we were to look at sort of racing, like car racing, then one of the reasons you watch NASCAR is because you're pretty sure there's going to be a crash. And so crashing is a thing. And if you watch the Tour de France, I mean, they must show 12 crashes a day, but you don't crash in most of the virtual cycling platforms. I get that from sort of a physical fitness perspective. I don't really want to be interrupted going around a corner. That being said, it removes a lot of the sitting on the edge of your seat while you're watching something because you might make a mistake. So for instance, in one of our earlier platforms, we were having a championship and a couple of guys got away and they actually started trash talking. It was pretty funny because they were sure they were going to win. And then they crashed in the last corner because they weren't paying attention. The guys from behind won. Anyway, that makes for great viewing. That makes for great stories. And it also gives you a reason to watch versus, okay, well, this guy's putting out, 50 more watts and he's on the climb. By the way, I find that interesting, but I also watch marathons. And as my wife says, I have no idea how you can watch a marathon and find it interesting. And I think that's the difference. Esports, and I think actually the platforms have to be built for a much larger audience rather than what I call the protein and, salad, protein shake and salad crowd. So I think it needs to be much broader in order to really get traction. So if you take an event like the Tour de France, what I would say is one of the reasons that resonates with everybody is because everybody rides a bicycle. They can be part of that event, line the roads, those sorts of things without having to be part of the protein shake and salad crowd. I've been a part of that crowd. I've also been a part of the burger and beer crowd, as well. But I think we need a lot more people who watching and also participating in our sports.
And do you think, Frank, that really this whole debate, isn't it, about gameplay and gamification versus sport and cycling and esports coming together and where does the balance lie? Because there's always a huge debate about where that balance lies and where the balance does lie. Do you think there's really a possibility for the market to expand almost to the extremes? Because at the moment, the market is pretty much, there's not a huge amount of differentiation in terms of the amount of cycling versus the amount of esports when you look across the offers that are out there at the moment. Are you pretty much saying then that you think the space needs more diversification in terms of that balance between cycling and esports?
I think people like Lionel and other people who are racing need to embrace something beyond power output and fitness as a vehicle for getting people engaged, right? In the end, cycling esports is about the spectator. It's not really about the athlete. And I think the athletes have to come to appreciate that's what it's about. And we have to deliver to the spectator what the spectator wants. Too often I hear the athletes talking about what the athletes want. And I get that. They worked super hard, and we were super happy to have all the athletes that we had in CVR World Cup. But we never lost the vision that it's about the spectator. And the more spectators you have, then the more it becomes about the athlete. But first, you've got to get the spectators, right? You've got to have a product that the customer, in this case, the spectators, want. And I think that's what's been lacking. There's been a little bit too much focus on the athletes, which I get, but I think you also have to worry about the spectators.
I'm going to just sort of shimmy you back a little bit in history again, because sort of that chronology. In 2019, you launched CVRcade, which was its own virtual cycling platform. So you sort of progressed from the racing series to a platform. Was that an effort to fill that space, or a space that you felt was needed at the time?
Yes. So you guys, Vancouver is an interesting inflection point for multiple reasons. But if you went back to Vancouver, one of the things that you would find, as an example, is we had an overlay. We had a gamified overlay of Zwift itself. What this would have is it would tell the competitors how many points they had scored, and there were sprint lines all throughout the course, and some of them had double points. Anyway, it was much more gamified. And so if you were to go back and look at a stream from that, you would see that on the screen. And this is sort of that inflection point. So Zwift was pushing back on that. One, because, that's obvious an overlay of their game, but they were also concerned that people could see Zwift as it really was, as opposed to having some overlays on it. I would try and explain to them back then when we would stream, like the leaderboards would be like the sprint leaderboard or the climb leaderboard, and people watching would just be totally confused by what was going on because you had these elements on the screen that had nothing to do with the actual race that was occurring. Went round and round a little bit on those pieces, and those are some of where we diverged. At that point, we decided, hey, it was kind of interesting. RGT was started at about that time, and Alex would come and he was like, we have better physics than Zwift. And I'd be like, I don't really care. Like, I actually care about physics. I'm a mathematician. And so I find that terribly interesting, but most people don't. And we wanted it to be accurate and simulated, but I was like, that's not why Zwift isn't gaining ground. These aren't as interesting to watch as they could be. We already had the vision of a more gamified experience where you could crash and other things could happen. At that point, we decided we couldn't really continue along with Zwift because they didn't share our vision. They were right or we were wrong or anything like that. It was just we had different visions, and so we pursued different visions. Now, at that point, to be honest, I was just like, okay, we're just going to shut down CVR World Cup and we're done with this. There was a lot of passion on the team, and they were like, oh, we could build something. Building a game is kind of like, filming a movie. Your chances of success are not high. In fact, they're quite low, generally speaking. And so I was like, no, I don't want to do. I don't know that much about, writing a game. And yeah, we're all software engineers, but it doesn't sound like a great idea to me. And so I was like, we'll shut it down. So the team asked, hey, well, give us a week and we'll put something together and we'll see if we can move in a direction where we might be able to provide a platform. And so they put some stuff together. They convinced me. I'm not sure. So that started a very long journey. And so we created some platforms along the way. But basically, we were a bunch of finance guys and software engineers and architects who didn't really understand building games. We started down that path. I think we're a lot better at understanding and building games today, but back then, not so much.
It's interesting to hear you talk about this overlay and to have leaderboards that populated and were specific to the game, because that feature is still asked for to this day, and they still don't have that on Zwift. It's interesting to hear your perspective on that. CVRcade, you say that you were kind of thrust into it. It wasn't exactly embraced by the community, and I'm kind of being nice when I say that, was a subject of a lot of ridicule. It was seen as a reactionary move by a lot of members of the Zwift community. Why do you think it was received that way?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the aforementioned, we probably didn't know what we were doing sort of approach. I'm fairly candid if you haven't noticed. And I think the other part was along the continuum of sort of like real cycling all the way to something hyper gamified that doesn't even resemble cycling in any sort of real way, we moved quite quickly. We weren't trying to recreate Zwift, which I think is also a fundamental, also a contributor to that, because I think people wanted to compare us and we didn't want to be Zwift, right? So our first initial forays into this weren't even bikes. They were more like motorcycles. They weren't really that. They were sci-fi bikes. And I think that just hurt a lot of people's heads. And on top of that, I think our execution was poor. So I think all those sort of factors contributed, to what was happening, how that was viewed as well. Now, I also think Zwift, or part of the Zwift community, wanted to protect Zwift as well. And we were seen as a threat, which I think is flattering. But I think between poor execution, not having a good fundamental understanding of what we were doing on the gaming side, and sort of this sort of protective community, that led us into some, we'll call those dark spaces at that time.
We live and learn, right? And you came back, you were undaunted, undeterred. October of 22, you launched CADEsport. And in a lot of ways, it was ahead of its time, right? You had real roads, you had power handicapping, cornering, wind effects, varied surfaces that would affect the performance of the game that weren't in a lot of the virtual cycling games at that point. Yet it still didn't catch on. Tell me about the innovation and what the thought was there, and why did that still not carve out a niche in the space for you?
One, we probably lacked a bit of confidence is one part of that equation, because I think in terms of gameplay, I think we were very close to the sweet spot. Gameplay's improved in Smash Your Fitness dramatically from CADEsport, but I think it had enough at the time. If we'd been confident and just sort of pushed, there's another caveat here, but I think the vision of that worked well. What also failed us there is execution in terms of the game itself. Again, almost at times we tried to look too differentiated from Zwift. Again, we weren't trying to be any of the other platforms, and what we were doing is quite a bit different on two fronts. One is this gamification that I'm talking about, which today actually ends up, I think, providing a better cycling experience and actually helping people to become better cyclists. So it actually should appeal now more directly to some of the protein shake and salad crowd. But we really wanted to create something much bigger, right? And I think Zwift wanted to do the same thing, right? Like, I think Zwift had in its vision creating a very large market space beyond sort of the niche hardcore cyclist, right? Running, and I think they had ideas of rowing, and it's easy to sort of connect the dots there. But I think the way that you have to approach that is you have to make it a comfortable environment for people who are super powerful and super strong to be able to come into the platform and to be able to enjoy it, right? So that's where equalization comes from, right? We want everybody to be able to play in the environment and to be part of the game. And yes, you're getting fit, and yes, you're working hard, but you're also applying some skills in as well. And the people who are super fit are still have advantages, right, in the game, but it takes maybe longer events for that to show. So now people who are, I think it's kind of funny if you think about the hardcore cyclists, if they're riding less than an hour, that's not even a real ride. Why would you do that? Cycling is basically an ultra endurance sport. But when you look at the broader community, they want to get on and do a workout in 20 minutes. That's where things sit. So I think you have to create an environment where people can come in, they can feel at home and comfortable, they can do it inexpensively, and they can introduce themselves into an environment doing 20-minute events, and then they'll expand from there. So that's our focus.
And I hear you saying that, and I hear you basically telling us about your latest project. You've utilized a lot of those features into your latest offering, and I must give you credit. You don't give up, Frank. I have to tell you. So your latest project is very exciting, Smash Your Fitness. Can you tell us about it? What are the USPs and the distinguishing features of Smash Your Fitness that people need to know about?
Well, I think the first and most important feature is to make it approachable. And we've done that in a number of different ways. So, for instance, if you were to get into Smash Your Fitness right now, the first thing you would be greeted with is what we call Smash Coach. And Smash Coach is just, you can talk to Smash Coach, you can, sort of message with it. You can tell it you want to ride a long climb, or you want to do a 20-minute workout, or you want it to build a workout plan. So we're just making that very approachable in terms of how you would approach that. We're making the cost points to enter the environment very low. So for instance, the Smashometer, which is basically a wearable, you put it on your ankle and you climb on a stationary bike or a bike on a trainer or a bike with a smart trainer even. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But that's a very inexpensive device. So you get in, that device is basically less than $40, sort of get started. By the way, it has some unique features for the geeks out there. It runs at 50 hertz, so it's very responsive. So one of the things that we do with that, as an example, is in our game, because it's gamified, if you're coming up on a corner and it's a sharp corner, you have to slow down. You might even have to brake for it. But we wanted to provide an approachable way to do that. So you just stop pedaling. That's all you have to do. And in 1/50th of a second, we're braking you in the game, as an example, if you're coming up on a corner. So it's just, you get on your bike, you can do it hands-free. We have a co-app, provides a surface where you can fire power-ups and actually do virtual gearing up and down, those types of things. But we're just trying to make it very approachable, very easy to get started. One, it's inexpensive, and then you just put something on your ankle and connect to the game, and off you go.
So, Frank, I'm just listening to you talk there. I have two immediate questions. One is this USA based or is this worldwide? And the second is this something literally I could take to the gym with me and use during my warm up?
Well, you've hit the nail right on the proverbial head there. So a couple of things. Smashometer today is only available in the US, but it will be probably in the next 15 to 30 days available in the EU as well. And that's just, by the way, that's more VAT taxes and getting approvals from governments because this is a physical device. Who knew this little device? It's literally about the size of a quarter. And I don't know what that would equate to in England, but it's quite light. And it's very easy to ship, but we got surprised by some of the VAT requirements. Because it's a physical device, for us to be able to warehouse the devices, we have to have the VAT tax all taken care of ahead of time, right? So that was a little bit of a slow up there, but it is coming quickly.
And what about the gym question? So I asked you about, can I take it to the gym with me and use it as part of my warm-up or part and parcel of what I might do in a standard gym workout session?
Well, yes, a couple of things that are very interesting there. We thought we would call ourselves Smash Cycling, and you notice that we call ourselves Smash Your Fitness instead. We wanted to brand a little bit broader because one of our primary use cases is the gym. So, you take it to the gym, and obviously you could get on a stationary bike, but you could also get on a treadmill, you could get on a stepper, you could get on a rower. And in this case, you would be moving the Smashometer device from your ankle to your wrist, let's say, if you were going to do rowing, as a good example. But it allows us, I sort of call it a gaming console on your wrist or on your ankle. It allows you to play a lot of different games. None of those are available yet, so we should probably focus on cycling. But you'll see where that's going long term in terms of our vision, and that can make the gym or exercise at home much more engaging. And so our tagline is, you move, your avatar moves, and that is our vision.
Now, are you still in beta now, Frank, or are you planning to move out of beta in the very near future?
Technically, this is pretty funny. We're still in beta. We're coming out of beta. And really, the sticking point for coming out of beta at the moment is more about the financial systems, which there's a bit of irony there, if you think about it, but is more about the financial systems than actually the game itself. Now, I think one important component for the game remains, and that is the mobile version is coming quickly. So one of the things that I think we didn't do well in terms of CADEsport was the execution of the technical side of the game. So I think we had the game itself, sort of the gameplay and the vision of the gameplay about right. It's improved over time. But our execution from a technical game perspective, we focused, for instance, on high-end gaming machines back then because that's where we thought it might be. Now we're much more focused on low-end machines because if you think about the indoor cycling platform, most of the people who have really good gaming rigs don't want to sweat next to them. So you're using it on your old laptop or you're using it on your phone or your tablet or that sort of thing. So that's a primary focus for us now as well.
I see it as a perfect fit for the virtual cycling curious crowd, like the people who don't necessarily want to spend $1,000 or $2,000 on a trainer. They can get the Smashometer and the 3-month bundle for $55 and they can be up and running. But then again, you can also use it with trainers as well. Is that correct?
It is. And actually, I'm an N=1 case, so we have to be careful here. But I kind of straddle this fence between sort of, gamer, fitness enthusiast, cyclist as well. But what I found is that one of the problems that I had with Zwift was I always went too hard, typically. I try and take the easy days, but then somebody like, Shane or CW or Casey Schum or somebody would pass me, right? And it would be like, I'm just that person, you just go after these. And then even if there's nobody there, then you had the leaderboards. And I always found myself going too hard. And I think one of the things that I've learned as I've sort of aged, because I'm a bit older now, is you think you're being super healthy, riding all the time and riding hard, and you feel pretty good, but it's not necessarily that healthy. And so one of our focuses was, how do we get people to be engaged in our platform on Zone 2 days? Why are you going to get onto our platform on a Zone 2 day and really be engaged? Like, how is it going to be better than watching a football game, as an example, right? Because I think that's what a lot of people do. And so if you're engaged in the game, I think the current games all tend to want to make you work too hard too often, right? Really once or twice a week is all you need to really go hard, right? And the rest of the time, you should probably be doing some different workouts. Well, one of the things that the Smashometer is really great at is Zone 2 rides, because we have a stamina management system, which actually I think which will make you a better cyclist for sure. Because if you're on with the Smashometer, we have this stamina wheel, and it shows you very much like how you would be doing in real life, how you're burning through your stamina, right? And so you can ride a Zone 2 workout and use virtual gearing to go faster, but you also see how your energy burns down. You also see how much drafting gives you back over time, right? And you learn, like, for instance, I was a sprinter when I was an outdoor cyclist, and I was always one to want to follow the brake. And if somebody did an attack, I would bring it back. And especially when you're feeling good, you're like, I can do all of this. But you learn, for instance, in Smash Your Fitness, no, you really can't, because you really are lessening sort of the kick you'll have in your legs at the end. And so you get to learn how to manage that better because you can visualize it and see it. So that makes Zone 2 rides great. So the way that I tend to ride Smash Your Fitness is most of the time I'm riding a Smashometer, even though I have my smart trainer. But on days where I really want to go really hard and be super competitive, I ride a smart trainer. So a couple times a week I ride a smart trainer, and 4 times a week I ride a Smashometer.
It's really an egalitarian approach, Frank, because Emma's a much better cyclist than I am, but we both put on the Smashometer and we can race against each other, and we're really of like abilities at that point. It certainly could have a much broader appeal. Is that what you're really looking for?
Absolutely. So again, we're looking to make this approachable, right? So I'm sure some hardcore cyclists, and I got this, one guy was like, well, I could just spin really fast. Right? Like, that's how I would go faster. Like, the Smashometer isn't about power. It's all about RPMs or something. And I was like, you got to get into the game to understand this. And I encourage everyone to do that. But the reason for this is it gives you a completely different view of how you go about cycling, right? Everything in Smash Your Fitness, all the gamifications that make it more approachable, more exciting to watch, and all of those things, in the end also accrued to making you a better cyclist. Learn how to manage your stamina, right? Yeah, you're strong, but there's other people who are strong as well. So how are you managing your energy? Because cycling is a lot about managing energy. How are you approaching corners? How do you brake for corners? How do you come out of corners? Like, one of the people on our platform was like, I've been riding mountain bikes forever, and I thought I did corners really well, but Smash Your Fitness has taught me how to take corners way better. Like, I'm making much better times on my circuits because my braking points have changed and how I accelerate out of the corners changed. Like, that's more sort of crit-based or mountain biking based, but we have different surfaces in our game. So we're not limited to sort of road cycling. We've got road and gravel, and all those things are different. We have different types of bikes in the game, and it matters which one you pick. So if you're going to go onto a sandy beach and ride on a sandy beach in our game, best not do that on a road bike with thin tires, that kind of thing, right? So that's what we're looking to do. So I think we're both more approachable, but I think sort of the hardcore people who come with an open mind will also find that we offer a number of benefits to them as well. Our AI coach helps them become a better cyclist, both in terms of fitness, but beyond fitness, skills. How do you ride in a group so you're not that guy, right? Or that gal that nobody wants to ride with, those types of things. As an example, that's sort of different in our game than, let's say, Zwift, is you can't ride through people in our game. And that was one of my primary concerns as a sprinter. So on Zwift, I could just sprint, right? And I go through everybody. But in the real world, I would say probably a quarter of the sprints that I lost were because I wasn't in the right position, or I got, hemmed in or whatever. And so we simulate that as well. Actually, I dare say our physics and our simulations and our drafting simulations are top notch. And I always hear people talking about how great the simulations are. You don't hear me talking about that a lot, but I think we probably have the best simulation, but we're also more focused on gamification, right? So that's not our primary selling point by any stretch of the imagination.
I was going to ask you about that. Talk about that word fitness. You explore the offer of Smash Your Fitness. And I was going to ask really whether it's a sort of a philosophical business shift to a different part of the market, or whether actually there's also something there for that top end elite athlete as well.
I think it will take some time. I would venture a bet, and it's a very large bet, actually, if you think about it in terms of my investment, that in the end, the real top end athletes will end up on our platform. One, because there'll be much higher viewership. Two, I actually think in the end, they'll find it more engaging. Now, will it be the athletes who are on the top rung of some of these other platforms? I actually don't believe it will be. I think they have the opportunity to be, but I think it will be people who can combine sort of the skill of cycling and gaming with the fitness as well. So more like soccer or football, depending on what portion of the world you're in, what you call it. If you think about what generally makes sport interesting to watch, even ones that don't have crashing, is the skills that people are using, right? That's what we tend to be amazed by. We appreciate that soccer players run a lot, okay? But we're truly typically amazed by their skill. And so I think in the end, skill will be the area that differentiates the esports community, rather than I'm just super fit and can suffer like no other. And so I think that's the primary difference.
Well, I think in the UK, a lot of people watch soccer to see how many tackles and penalties are given, and what the I was going to say athletes, but players can get away with. There's always a debate in the UK between cyclists being real athletes and footballers or soccer players from the States not being. But that's a completely different story. Frank, you talk a lot about viewership and audience, and you talk right at the top of the podcast when we were chatting, about getting that audience, and the viewers and the spectators were absolutely key. How, in relation to Smash Your Fitness, is that, what's your vision about how that works?
First, we build the platform and the people come. It's a Field of Dreams reference, I guess. And then I think the spectators come. One of the things that I sort of learned early on, my dad even told me, you can't buy customers, or if you do, it doesn't work out very well, very long. We tried to even do that with some big prize purses at the beginning, right? And we had a community around Zwift and whatnot. But people don't come to watch the events because there's a lot of money involved. The reason sort of American football is big in the States, and then sort of, football in general across the rest of the world from a FIFA perspective, people just love watching the game, right? They played it probably when they were a kid. They love watching the game. And that's where the big price purses come from, is because people want to watch the game, right? And so what I saw in the virtual and created myself was we tried to do it sort of backwards. In that way, I think that's something that the cycling esports is missing. We've got to create a product, a platform where it's exciting to watch. And again, that's the approachable part of it, right? We all played soccer well, not all of us, but we did different things. There's a lot of people who watch soccer played as they were kids. And we've got to get people comfortable coming into the platform. And then the other thing that most people don't understand about esports, and this is really bad in the cycling esports area, is most of the people who join a Dota tournament actually think they can win. They probably can, okay, because there's some really good people out there. But they have the belief that they can. Well, part of the problem with cycling esports is most people get immediately that they have no chance. Like, who wants to watch something or do something where you have virtually no chance? Nobody wants to do that. That's part of the whole equalization thing. So the first thing that you would think as a well-trained cyclist is, why would I want to get on a platform where it's equalized? I wouldn't want to do that. And I totally get that. You've put so much time and effort into becoming super fit. But the reason they're going to want to do that in the end is that's where the spectators are going to be. That's where the community is really going to be. And that's where those other people are going to be impressed. And equalization gives everybody a shot at winning. And in the end, for esports, that's critical. And so that's what we look to.
That's such a different perspective. It's really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to follow how it works.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you've placed a huge bet on this. You're very successful in business, but you've chosen to finance a lot of these projects on your own. I can the passion, and even going back to being in one of the very first races on Zwift, you have a clear belief in virtual cycling. You want to bring it to the masses. What is it about virtual cycling that motivates you to keep trying over and over and over to solve that problem?
Well, I'm in the US, and I think as a country, we could certainly be a lot healthier than we are. I see this sort of as twofold. For a lot of my career, I was focused on building businesses. I don't know if I was ever, I know people who are really focused on money and who make lots of it. And I was never one of those, but certainly was more focused on building businesses and certainly acquiring some wealth so that my later years could be a bit more fun. I'm not nearly as focused on that anymore. We're very focused on, so as an example, consultants hate me. I'm just the worst person ever because we should be charging more, but that's not what we want to do. We want to bring fitness and enjoyment and the combination of those. And I hope the world continues in that direction, right? Where we're not all sitting on a chair with a controller in our hands, sort of engaging with people. As an example, we provide in-game audio, like it's just built into the game. And I remember having a conversation, I think it was with Eric Min, and he was like, why would you do that? Like, I just don't get it because there's Discord out there. And I'm like, well, we think it's important to have that social interaction. And while you might not want to have it, that making it convenient and available, I think makes a big difference, right? We want to build that sense of community. We want people to have good relationships. We want them to be healthy, both from a physical perspective as well as a mental perspective. And so that's really more of our focus. We're also just having fun. So let's not make us too grandiose. It's a lot more fun writing a game than it is writing financial software. Sorry, financial software folks. But we have a lot of fun with it. And we hope to make a difference in the world as well.
Oh, Frank, I'm going to draw a line right there because that is a fabulous place for us to stop today. Thank you ever so much for joining us. You can subscribe to the Virtual Velo Podcast on your favourite podcast provider and, of course, on YouTube. You can follow Emma Martin, that's me, on Instagram at biking_Emma. And Chris, you can find him at the Zwift. You can catch up with me putting words to the action on Saturday this week because the Echelon Racing League is on. And of course, on Sunday, it's the Sunday Race Club on my Whoosh, and I will be there as well. Head over to thezimmunicate.com and sign up for the bi-monthly newsletter to support independent cycling esports journalism. We have more interesting guests lined up. We are packed, our schedule. I'm not quite sure how many more weeks Chris and I can schedule at the moment, but there are some fabulous guests from the world of cycling esports joining us, including Carla Williams, Birdie and Driscoll, and Ariel van Haren from the Aeonian team. 2028's Nicola Kramer, Cycling Canada's Josh Peacock, and several other impactful people waiting in the wings. Thank you for your patience, everybody on the list. We are coming to you slowly, and those episodes are ticking up. Well, thank you to Frank. Thank you ever so much, Frank. It's been absolutely fabulous talking to you today. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. Stay safe, enjoy your riding. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.